Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of the Bizport M&A Peelback. And today we are going to take a departure from the direct-to-consumer deal coverage that we've done the last couple of times and switch instead to AI labs competing with one another. So today we're going to kick around an interesting one. We've got a joint venture that includes Anthropic, Blackstone, H&F, plus Apollo, et cetera, that acquired a company called Fractional AI, which is an agency of forward deployed engineers that can implement AI models on behalf of other businesses. So anyway, what does all that mean? That's a ton of jargon. I'm going to kick it over to my partner here, Kyle, to cover some of the backstory.
Yeah, so I guess interesting take on this. So prior to Bizport, I obviously ran an agency called OpenRec. We were recruiting for mainly startups, and Fractional AI was actually one of our clients. So I knew them fairly intimately and kind of understood like how high their talent bar was and like what the types of engineers they're actually hiring for. So I knew about them, and then they had this relationship with OpenAI where any basically customer inquiries that OpenAI would get around like, oh, like how do I implement this model at my company? They basically defer to Fractional AI at the time.
Gotcha. So it sounds like Fractional is kind of like the boots on the ground that helps a company implement business tools from, let's say, OpenAI or Anthropic. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. I think with the main hypothesis that AI right now, like especially open source, it's just very hard to implement and it's very custom. So you need a partner like Fractional AI or some very talented engineering team to do it for you.
Yeah. And by the way, this deal, of course, came out and OpenAI made a similar investment within like a 24-hour period of Anthropic making this announcement, a similar kind of forward deployed engineer opportunity as well. So it seems like there's some background here. This acquisition didn't just kind of like come from the ashes. How did this joint venture even get started in the first place?
Yeah, so I guess in early May, I'm sure there are a lot of behind the scenes conversations in the boardroom at both
For sure.
and Anthropic. But I think that there's this big theme that's been happening, and Sequoia actually wrote an article about this back in March, where they said the next $1 trillion company will be a services company masquerading as a software company.
Yes.
And the whole point of the article, they commented on, I think the stat is companies spend about $6 in services for every dollar they spend on software.
Interesting.
So I think it was kind of this anticipation of like, okay, they as in OpenAI and Anthropic, they recognize that a lot of customers actually needed someone to actually do the implementation work beyond just, serving them this open source model. So I think that's kind of like the background that led to Anthropic starting this JV in early May, and then, with the eventual acquisition of Fractional AI.
Right. And it looks like there are a bunch of participants at the table here. It's $300 million from Anthropic, Blackstone, H&F. So it's not just like AI labs that are interested here. Like, but Blackstone is what traditional private equity that's putting money forth here. So my guess is they probably want forward deployed engineering on their own team, possibly. On that subject, what is a forward deployed engineer? We hear this a ton.
Yeah. So it's it's been a hot role in Silicon Valley, especially in the past couple of years. But it was actually popularized by Palantir probably more than a decade ago. Where Palantir would essentially send out engineers, could be software, could be like kind of hardware centric engineers, send them out to client locations so they can fully understand the problem space, the user feedback, etc., and actually work with the client hand in hand to implement some kind of technological solution.
For
Which
sure.
is way different than, let's say a software engineer sitting behind a desk, coding all day. This is like an actual customer facing engineer that, solves real problems and does the implementation themselves.
Right. Yeah. This is like the McKinsey consultant version of an AI engineer, right?
Yeah.
Who's someone who flies out and gets the work done. And we assume is client facing too, right? So these people have got to have personal skills. These are high value engineers, right? So interesting. And so we know the headline price here is $1.5 billion that was funneled into Fractional AI to get this deal done. We can dive into valuation more later and financial terms, but at a high level, like what's the thinking? Why do these AI labs want to acquire Fractional?
Yeah, so I think it's partly, I guess you alluded it with your comment on McKinsey. I actually think all these these legacy industries, like service-based companies like a McKinsey or a large accounting firm or a large law firm, I think they're realizing the power that AI has in making their businesses more efficient and potentially like complete disruption of their respective spaces. So I think this is the bet on the future of what these like tech-enabled services can look like, especially powered by, Anthropic's models and fractional AI's help with actual implementation.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you read into more about this deal, the JV is talking about how really the end result here is fractional AI's talent is going to be deployed on SMB, small to medium sized businesses. So why SMBs? Like why not like Fortune 500 and why not, 2-person mom and pop shops?
Yeah, I think it's also, honestly gonna be probably a mix. At least when I was working with Fractional AI, they were kind of working with a blend of different companies.
Yeah.
But I think my hypothesis around that is that it's easier to implement AI when the company is smaller, and then you can kind of set the infrastructure layer of like, okay, like here's all your AI native workflows and processes.
Right.
With a larger company with like legacy systems, especially like ERP systems, I think it's just going to be a much heavier lift, and then you'll need to retrain, potentially thousands of people at a larger enterprise company.
Yeah, it's like Princess and the Pea. If it's too small, they don't have the budget. If it's too big, it's a nightmare to get the implementation right. So like right in the middle is like the sweet spot. Okay, that makes sense. And wait a minute, but like doesn't Anthropic already have like a partner network or implementation specialists that go out and help businesses, install and optimize Claude, or am I wrong there?
Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, I don't know their trusted kind of Rolodex of those agencies, but I do know that there's been agencies, software development agencies that specifically use Anthropic's models for
Mhm.
implementation for their own services. You'd have to imagine, yeah, like to your point, there must be like a short list of like people that they refer out to, especially for their larger enterprise customers, where implementation's kind of the requirement, right, to use their models and pay Anthropic.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it reminds me of the Shopify partner network for direct to consumer, where like if I want to get something done on my Shopify store, there's an approved third party who can like point and shoot and do something for me.
Yeah.
That exists, but probably not at the same scale that this JV is envisioning for fractional, right? Post close. Important note on nomenclature. So after this JV was raised and the deal happened, the new fractional AI version underneath Anthropic, I guess, is called Ode with Anthropic, right? That's the
Yeah.
Ode is the term. So yeah, we'll start referring to it as Ode, the way Claude would want us to. Okay, interesting. And so I guess from the perspective of like a founder who runs a services company, what are some of the takeaways around why this deal happened and what that could mean for their own businesses?
Yeah, well, I guess I think this is the overall theme of vertical integration. I think Anthropic kind of realized like, a lot of their customers wanted this kind of like end solution with their products. So I think that's why they, formed the JV and bought Fractional AI.
Yeah,
Ultimately, I think it's going to be a good experience and result for everyone involved. Because again, I think the more people start to use AI, the more people realize there's intricacies with implementing them, and for anyone to do it, as good as Anthropic and the one
right.
building the models, I think it's a stretch. So they're the best suited to actually do it, and with the help of the Fractional AI team or the O team.
Right. Right. And it's super interesting too. This just hit me. We're in an AI first world, but this acquisition happened primarily because of the team at Fractional AI, right? It's the people who are the value, not necessarily their tech. And I think that's like worth noting for anyone building a services firm. Like, talented people are very hard to replace, right? Okay. So we mentioned earlier, the deal is at 1.5 billion. We don't know much about the deal structure, the multiples. What's your best guess, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm not too sure honestly. I think honestly it was mostly probably an equity role, if I were to guess. I think that's typically how these deals happen, especially with tech companies rolling up kind of more traditional service-based companies.
Yeah. Wait, walk us through how one of those equity role works, what that means for a founder.
Yeah, so for example, in lieu of cash, let's say a more traditional acquisition from a private equity company, right? Like they'd probably pay most of the top line valuation in the form of cash down. So
Right.
up to like, 70, 80%. My hypothesis is that, they basically forfeited their ownership in the company like in fractional AI to basically transfer over into this new company called Ode with Anthropic. So the co-founders and maybe some of the equity holding employees now own a chunk of Ode. And then Ode with with the investment from the JV is
Sure.
probably valued at, I would guess, probably in the billions, like low
Hmm.
billions.
Hmm.
So it's more still like an increase in equity value on paper, less so like, these co-founders are walking away with a bag of cash.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Right. So the mechanics are I sell my company to Anthropic or this JV, and I get, I guess, a consortium of equity in one of those acquirers. And that's my swap company for equity. And then if that company ever goes public, which by the way, Anthropic may in short order, that's my real payday, right? After the IPO.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Assuming there's
Yeah.
like, I don't know the kind of like entity structure, like Ode with Anthropic. I don't know if it's like parent company of Anthropic, so I don't know how those mechanics would work out. But yeah, potentially like, it's kind of betting on a future liquidity event for Ode, to your
Yeah.
point.
Or maybe it's even an equity roll into that JV that was created, right? That everybody kind of paid
Yeah.
into. Who knows? We don't know the structure there. And we can talk to actually, this type of structure has turned out quite well for some founders in the services space. I remember, didn't Cursor AI buy a recruiting agency recently?
Yeah, that was growth by design. Yeah, that was a similar situation where, again, from a high level, I don't know the exact details, but I'm guessing here it was mostly an acqui-hire structure where only a few key team members were actually absorbed into Cursor, and then
Sure.
there was another split off with maybe a sister agency. But earlier this year, obviously there was an announcement from the SpaceX acquisition of Cursor, so hopefully that was a nice payday, and the founders saw the liquidity event from that kind of equity rollover into Cursor.
Right. Right. I guess if you're Adam Grant, I think his name was Adam Grant from Growth by Design.
Adam Ward, yeah.
Adam Ward, excuse me, Adam Ward. If you're listening, shout out to you for doing this deal. But he probably sold his company into Cursor in exchange for Cursor shares, and then when Cursor got acquired by SpaceX, that was a big payday for him. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, I never would have expected that would be the path to liquidity, but that's a very real thing in the services world. Sounds like Kyle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially with tech and you know equity is everything in the startup world, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool, cool. And so what's interesting is also we mentioned this JV acquired Fractional, and within like 24 hours, OpenAI did a very similar thing. So can you take us through that too, Kyle?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's low key maybe a pissing contest between the
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah.
Lack of a better term, but yeah, but obviously like they're kind of competing with the same kind of market share and problem space in mind. And again,
Yeah.
the history with like fractional AI and first partnering with OpenAI and then Anthropic, going in and acquiring them. I think that in itself has a kind of like a competitive aspect to it.
Right.
I think, it was probably a reactionary thing where we saw kind of a similar flavor to this back with Uber and Lyft, where there
Yeah.
was like competitive tactics and like reactions, to one another's strategy.
Totally. Totally. And when the tech gets to the point, I mean, the models, there are slight differences between the LLMs from both AI labs, but none of that matter unless real businesses are using these models on a daily basis and getting charged tokens, right? And we assume that the faster that like big organizations can implement Claude or let's say OpenAI's LLM, the better that is for their business, right? So that's kind of the bet probably that both AI labs are making. So that's interesting. So interesting. Related to that, if I think we've seen a lot of this kind of like one upping on AI LLM capabilities, and maybe that like technical ability is enough, but do you think the winner here over the long haul is the one who has the best LLM or the one who can crack implementation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I almost think it's the latter. I think if you asked me maybe a couple of years ago when LLMs were still emerging and still getting a lot more advanced, I
Yeah.
probably would say like, hey, yeah, probably the AI lab with the strongest model would win.
Yeah.
But I feel like the status quo now is like these AI models are being commoditized.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a race to the bottom in the sense that tokens are getting cheaper, models are getting more efficient. There's AI labs that are creating even smaller models that are just very specialized, just again for
Yeah.
this efficiency. And then we're seeing all these labs also spin up from from China and other countries where like they're a fraction of the cost of what Claude would charge.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think like implementation is the name of the game. I think the model is a model, and right now there's this like convergence path where most models are I think sufficient for what a lot of people need in terms of like AI workflows and agents and tooling. So the implementation and building like a damn good product based on the models is going to be key.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I'm excited to see how it unfolds. So, what's your take? Is this JV going to acquire more for deployed engineering agencies like this? Is this the one and done? Like, is this a trend? What do you think?
I think they're going to be continue doubling down. They'll
Okay.
probably get some space to Ode, and I mean, it's only been a few months, and there's probably some like some ramp up period, transitionary things. But I think if the model works, like 6 months later, I think they're going to double down and start acquiring more firms, and especially with strong forward deployed engineer teams to scale up this implementation work.
Yeah, it's kind of like building like a technical sales team to some extent. I mean, I assume the clients are already sold by the time like the Fractional AI's team would get involved, but like it also helps that end user stand up a process where they're like dependent on Claude or they're dependent on OpenAI's models internally, and that's like stickiness, right? That's why everyone loves SaaS because it's sticky. This is like even stickier than sticky. So that could be an angle too. So do you think OpenAI's deployment company is going to acquire as well?
Yeah, I mean, you would need to think that they'll probably follow suit. And again, I think this whole year will be the year of tech-enabled services and these like AI service roll-ups. And we've seen this as well with buyers and sellers that we're working with. Like, there's a lot of cross-pollination and people wanting to just own the whole vertical stack of both the
Yeah.
technology and the services.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And then quick prediction from you, Kyle. Do you think these AI labs will acquire other types of services firms, right? Like the fit of forward deployed engineering agencies makes sense, but like, let's
Yeah.
think outside of the box. Would they acquire a different type of firm?
Yeah. So my hypothesis is that there's probably a team of strategy analysts at OpenAI and Fractional AI where they're kind of figuring out, okay, which services has the biggest market share and the highest growth, and
Right.
kind of like prioritizing based on that. Because like obviously like this like kind of more enterprise consulting implementation, like it's probably the most general and therefore probably the maybe the largest TAM. But then and there's already been partnerships laid out with CPA firms. Actually, McKinsey's probably partnered with one of the AI labs at this point.
Yeah.
And then we see all these like companies spinning up like Harvey in the legal space. So I think it's going to be tackling the kind of more like billion-dollar industries first, and then probably getting narrow into different service niches.
Right. 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 And they certainly have the cash to do that. I mean, I think the venture dollars being pumped into these AI labs are just it's just unbelievable, especially as the IPO, right? That'll just add more fuel to the fire. And I think the other thing, like if you're a services agency, let's say staffing or for deployed engineering, what's your take on valuations? Like, is this going to be a rising tide that makes your wildest dreams come true if you decide to exit someday?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is kind of setting a price floor. Obviously, even though we don't know the actual numbers and the deal structure, I think what this signals in the market is that there's demand, for actual like tech-enabled services companies, where the demand wasn't, it was there before, but from a different buyer, like a financial buyer, right? But then you see AI labs actually showing interest in actually service-based companies. I think that's gonna drive the multiples and the prices up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you make a good point. So we deal with two types of buyers primarily at Bizport: strategic buyers and financial buyers. Financial buyers are relatively easy to understand, right? They are private equity firms that seek an ROI for every investment they do and every acquisition they do. And it's very clear the hurdle rate they have to hit. A strategic buyer is a corporation that maybe makes another product and their main business is making and shipping that product. And they acquire on the side opportunistically where they think they should buy a company that helps their main business. So I think maybe what we're seeing here is, services agencies have been kind of like lock and key fits for financial buyers for a long time. And maybe we're seeing a shift to basically these AI labs are becoming strategic buyers, right? For the most part. And then the valuations are now decoupled from the raw financials of that services firm. And that should spell like a really bright future for anyone running a services company, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, this is a good one. Anything else you want to cover, Kyle, about this one before we wrap? I think there's a lot of meat on the bone here.
No, I'm pretty excited. I think this will kind of set the tone for the rest of the year. This is definitely not the only acquisition they'll make out of the JV, and you'd have to think too, like, they didn't spend the whole $1.5 billion on Ode or fractional AI. Like, it's a lot of ammo to shoot out more acquisitions, and you know I think like companies like fractional AI and just services based companies in general too, they tend to be at least break even, if not like cash flow positive. So they could probably acquire a bunch of these companies and not hurt their bottom line as well.
Yeah, that's true. It's a bright future for anyone playing in this space. Well, that'll about do it for this episode of the M&A Peelback. Subscribe for more of these, and if there's a deal you want us to kick around, comment below. Send us notes at frank@biz-port or .com, excuse me, or kyle@biz-port.com. We're happy to take your suggestions and toss around the latest and the greatest in the M&A world.
Sweet.
Cheers. Bye.